My brother got a brand new car for graduating, and 5 minutes later, my life in that house quietly ended. Stay with me as I tell you how one envelope, handed to me during a celebration, showed me exactly where I stood in my own family. And if this story connects with you, take a moment to support the channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. The driveway was full that afternoon. Neighbors leaned over fences. Family members crowded around, smiling wide, phones already raised. Corey stood in the center like he'd won something bigger than a diploma. My mom, Marissa, held out the keys like they were sacred. When they dropped into his palm, everyone cheered. Someone clapped. Someone whistled. I smiled too, because that's what I always did. I stood off to the side, near the porch steps, holding a paper cup that had gone warm. I'd helped pay the electric bill that month. I'd covered groceries the week before. I'd done it quietly, like always, because things were tight and I was the reliable one. When the noise settled, my mom walked over to me. She handed me a plain white envelope. No writing on the front. I assumed it was a thank you card, maybe a note for being such a good sport. I even felt a small flicker of hope. Inside was a printed sheet. Rent, $650. Utilities, split. Shared household costs. My name was typed at the top. For a second, I thought I'd misunderstood. I read it again. My chest tightened. Around me, laughter continued. Corey was already talking about his first drive. Someone asked him where he was going to take the car that night. I looked up at my mom. She didn't look back. She just said, "We'll talk later," like this was normal. Like this wasn't the moment something broke. I felt small standing there. Not because of the money, but because of the timing. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't last minute. This was planned. They had chosen this day. This moment. Celebration for him, accounting for me. I thought about the things I'd put off. College classes I paused. Apartments I never toured. Trips I never took because the family needed help, just for now. I thought about how I was always told I was strong, responsible, mature. How Corey was told to enjoy being young. The cheering faded into background noise. I folded the paper slowly and slid it back into the envelope. No one noticed. No one asked if I was okay. That's when it hit me, not all at once, but heavy and clear. I wasn't being treated like a daughter who belonged there. I was being billed like a backup plan. A safety net. A solution. I stayed quiet. I clapped when everyone else did. But inside, something settled. I finally understood my place. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The rent bill didn't shock me because of the money. It shocked me because it finally gave a name to something I'd felt my whole life. Looking back, the pattern had always been there. I just didn't want to see it. When I was a kid, school supply shopping meant a short list and a reminder to be grateful. I learned early how to stretch notebooks, how to make pens last, how to say I didn't need anything extra. My mom would say, "You're strong, Niel. You can handle it." And I believed her. I wore that word like armor. Corey's experience was different. His backpacks were new every year. His shoes fit just right. When he forgot homework, it was brushed off. When I did well, it was expected. When he did well, it was celebrated. By the time I was 16, I had my first job. I worked evenings, weekends, whatever I could fit around school. The money didn't stay with me long. There was always something the house needed. Groceries. Gas. A light bill that came with worry attached to it. I handed over cash without being asked because I could see the stress in my mom's face. Calvin came into our lives later, and the dynamic only grew sharper. He respected Corey's dreams. Talked about his future. Told him he'd go far. When it came to me, Calvin talked about responsibility. About realism. About knowing my place. When bills stacked up during my second year of college, the conversation happened at the kitchen table. My mom said it was temporary. That family helps family. I took a break from school to work more hours. One semester turned into another. Nobody asked when I was going back. Corey stayed focused on school. That was the story everyone told. He needed support. He needed peace. I was told I was already set. That I could always go back later. Later never came. Years passed quietly. I paid when I could. Covered gaps when things fell short. I didn't keep score because I didn't want resentment in my heart. I thought love meant giving without counting. The rent bill changed that. Seeing my name typed at the top made everything else line up. This wasn't about fairness or adulthood. This was about roles. Corey was the investment. I was the insurance. Nobody had ever thanked me for stepping in. Nobody had ever said my sacrifice mattered. It was just assumed. Expected. Normal. The bill didn't come with a conversation or a question. It came with certainty. Like this was the natural next step for someone like me. That's when I understood it wasn't one moment of cruelty. It was a lifetime of small decisions that always leaned the same way. Toward him. Away from me. The envelope didn't introduce something new. It confirmed what had always been true. I waited until the house was quiet before I said anything. The excitement from earlier had faded, and Corey was out front, wiping down the car like it might disappear if he stopped looking at it. I found my mom in the kitchen, rinsing dishes that didn't need to be rinsed. I asked her calmly why rent had never been mentioned before that day. She didn't turn around right away. When she did, her face was already set. She said it wasn't sudden. She said we'd talked about it before, even though we never had. When I told her that, she sighed like I was being difficult. Then she said something that sat heavy in the room. She said I was past 21, that I was an adult, and that adults contribute. She said I'd stayed longer than most kids do, and that the household had carried me. I reminded her of the bills I'd paid. The groceries. The months I'd covered the light bill without being asked. She waved her hand like those things were favors, not support. She said that didn't count as rent. That was just me doing my part. Calvin stepped in from the hallway, drawn by raised voices. He leaned against the counter and folded his arms. He spoke like this was a meeting, not a family conversation. He said the numbers were fair. He said the timing made sense. He said structure was important. There was no emotion in his voice, only finality. I asked why Corey wasn't being charged anything. Calvin didn't answer that. My mom said Corey had just graduated and needed time to get on his feet. She said it like it was obvious. Like there was no need to explain why one child deserved patience and the other didn't. That's when I realized Corey was standing in the doorway. He must have heard everything. He didn't say a word. He didn't look uncomfortable or surprised. He just glanced down at his phone, smiled at something on the screen, and went back outside. The sound of the door closing behind him felt louder than the argument. He didn't defend me. He didn't ask questions. He didn't even acknowledge that this conversation involved him too. The car was his reward, and responsibility wasn't part of the deal. I stood there, waiting for someone to soften. For someone to say this wasn't how they meant it to sound. But no one did. My mom crossed her arms and said we'd talk later, like she had earlier in the driveway. Calvin nodded, satisfied that the matter was settled. To them, this wasn't personal. It was practical. I walked back to my room slowly, feeling something close in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was clarity, the kind that hurts because it leaves no room for hope. For the first time, I understood that I wasn't misunderstood. I was seen exactly as they intended. And in that house, I stood alone. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed with my laptop open and a notebook beside me. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I did what I had always done when things felt out of control. I started adding things up. I went through my bank statements month by month. Grocery store charges I recognized without thinking. The electric bill I'd paid when the power company left a red notice on the door. Gas money I'd handed over in cash. Transfers marked rent help or just until Friday. None of it had ever been called rent before. It was just help. Family help. I wrote it all down. Dates. Amounts. Patterns. There was the summer I paid for groceries every week because my mom's hours were cut. The winter when I covered the light bill twice in 1 month because it kept climbing. The weekends I watched my cousins so my aunt could work overtime. I'd never asked for anything in return. I didn't keep receipts because I didn't think I'd ever need proof. By the time I finished, my chest felt tight. The total was more than I wanted to admit. More than the number printed on that rent bill. It wasn't just money. It was time. Energy. Choices I'd put on hold without complaint. I opened my savings account next. The number there was modest, but it represented years of discipline. Skipping things. Saying no. Holding on to the idea that one day I'd need it to leave, or go back to school, or start fresh. The amount they were asking for would cut that number in half in 1 month. And then it hit me. This wasn't about one payment. If I paid now, it would never stop. Next month would come with another envelope. Another explanation. Another reason why I needed to contribute more. The line would keep moving, and I'd keep chasing it, always one step behind. They weren't asking for help. They were setting a rule. One that only applied to me. I imagined myself a year from now. Still in that room. Still handing over money. still watching Corey move forward while I stayed in place. The picture was clear and it scared me. I closed my laptop slowly, put the notebook away. I didn't feel the urge to argue anymore. The conversation had already happened, and it had told me everything I needed to know. So I went quiet. I smiled when spoken to. I nodded when plans were discussed. I watched how easily my absence of reaction went unnoticed. No one asked how I was feeling. No one checked in. I started observing instead of explaining, listening instead of defending. Every comment, every expectation, every assumption landed differently now. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't angry. I was alert. And once you see the trap clearly, you don't waste energy shouting about it. You start looking for the exit. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. Not because I was afraid they'd stop me, but because I needed it to stay mine. During the day, I acted the same. I answered questions. I nodded when my mom talked about bills. I didn't bring up the envelope again. On the surface, everything stayed calm. At night, I moved carefully. I waited until the house settled into sleep. The TV went quiet. Doors closed. Footsteps faded. Then I opened my closet and started sorting through my things one piece at a time. I packed only what was mine. Clothes I'd bought myself. Shoes I'd paid for. Papers I'd kept safe over the years. I didn't rush. I folded everything neatly, like I wasn't running away, like I was simply preparing for something normal. Each night, one bag filled. Then another. I hid them in the trunk of my car under an old blanket. There was a strange peace in doing it quietly. No arguing. No explaining. Just action. At work, I mentioned to a coworker that I was thinking of moving out. I didn't give details. She told me her cousin had a room available. It wasn't fancy. Just a small space in a quiet apartment. When she showed me pictures, I felt my shoulders relax. It looked clean. Still. Safe. I said yes without overthinking it. I signed nothing dramatic. Paid the deposit. Set a move-in date. Each step felt solid, like placing stones across water. I could see where I was going. Back at home, no one noticed the small changes. No one noticed the missing shoes. No one noticed the drawer that no longer stuck because it wasn't full anymore. They were too focused on what they expected from me next. There were moments when I wanted to speak up. When my mom mentioned the rent again, casually, like it was already settled. When Calvin talked about responsibility while watching TV. When Corey laughed in the driveway, proud and unburdened. I swallowed my words every time. I realized that defending myself would only turn into another debate I was meant to lose. Explaining would invite them to rewrite my reasons. Arguing would drain the energy I needed to leave. So I stayed quiet. I moved my important documents into a folder. Put my savings card in my wallet. Changed passwords late at night with my phone screen dimmed low. Each small step gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. I didn't hate them. I didn't plan revenge. I just stopped offering pieces of myself for free. By the time everything was ready, nothing on the outside had changed. The house still ran the same. The expectations were still there. But inside me, something was steady. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. And they had no idea I was already halfway gone. I woke up before my alarm, long before the house stirred. The sky outside my window was still dark, that quiet blue-gray that comes before morning decides what it wants to be. I didn't turn on the light. I already knew where everything was. I dressed quickly, pulling on clothes I'd set aside the night before. My bags were already in the trunk. I moved through the room one last time, checking drawers, the closet, the corners I'd lived in for years. Nothing of mine stayed behind. Nothing I'd earned or paid for remained in that house. The hallway floor creaked softly as I walked. I paused, listening. No movement. No voices. Everyone was asleep, dreaming about the day ahead. Corey's first drive. The compliments. The photos. The applause that would follow him wherever he went. I stopped in the kitchen. The counter was clean. The envelope with my name on it was still taped to the fridge, like a reminder of my place. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it said. I didn't write a note. Not yet. Words could wait. Silence was stronger in that moment. I opened the door slowly and stepped outside. The morning air was cool, sharp, and real. It felt different breathing without holding something back. I closed the door behind me without a sound. The car started on the first turn of the key. As I pulled away, the house stayed dark. No lights flicked on. No one came running out. The driveway that had been full of cheering just a day earlier now held nothing but shadows. I drove slowly at first, like I was afraid something might stop me. But nothing did. Each block I passed felt lighter. Each turn made the distance grow in a way that felt permanent. By the time the sun began to rise, I was already on the highway. I thought about how they'd notice. My empty room. The quiet where I used to be. The absence of my car in the driveway. The confusion. The questions. I imagined my mom calling my name, expecting an answer. Calvin checking his watch. Corey waiting, keys in hand, ready for his first drive, not realizing the support system he never noticed was already gone. There would be no goodbye. No warning. I didn't know them that. Goodbyes are for people who listen. Warnings are for people who care enough to ask. Everything I took belonged to me. My clothes. My papers. My future. I didn't take a single thing I hadn't earned. The silence I left behind wasn't an accident. It was a boundary. I wasn't disappearing to punish them. I was leaving to protect myself. As the sun climbed higher, the road opened up in front of me. I didn't look back. There was nothing left there for me to explain. The applause would fade. The car would age. The house would wake up. And I would already be gone. I wrote the letter after I settled into my new place, when my hands were steady and my thoughts were clear. I didn't rush it. I wanted every word to be calm, the way I felt once the door behind me was closed. I returned to the house later that afternoon while no one was home. The driveway was empty. The new car was gone. I let myself in quietly and went straight to the kitchen. I sat at the table where so many conversations had ended without me being heard. I placed the letter in the center of the counter. It wasn't emotional. There were no accusations. I didn't talk about how hurt I was or how long I'd waited for someone to choose me. I wrote facts, dates, numbers, clear lines that couldn't be twisted or explained away. I listed every contribution I could remember. Groceries paid in full during the summer when hours were cut. Utility bills covered when shut-off notices arrived. Emergency rent paid to keep a roof over our heads. Childcare for cousins on weekends, so others could work overtime. I included months and amounts next to each one. I stapled copies of bank statements and receipts behind the letter. Not all of them, just enough. Enough to show this wasn't opinion or exaggeration. Enough to make it undeniable. The letter explained that none of this had ever been called rent. It had never been discussed as an obligation. It had been given freely, out of love and responsibility. I made it clear that I had never been thanked, never reimbursed, and never offered the same grace now being extended to Corey. I wrote that the rent bill wasn't about adulthood. It was about roles, and that I was done accepting mine. I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't ask for reconciliation. I didn't threaten anything. I simply stated that I would no longer contribute financially to a household where my presence was treated as a debt. The last line was short. I rewrote it twice before leaving it as it was. I will never again pay to be tolerated. I folded the letter carefully and left it where it couldn't be missed. I didn't hide it. I didn't make it dramatic. I wanted it found naturally, the way truth usually is. As I walked back out, I felt lighter than I expected. This wasn't about getting back at anyone. It wasn't about proving I was right. It was about ending a story that had gone on too long. They could argue with my absence. They could rewrite conversations. But they couldn't erase numbers on a page. They couldn't deny what had been given and taken. That was my revenge. Not loud, not cruel, not emotional. Just the truth, laid flat on the counter, waiting to be read. It didn't take long for things to shift after I was gone. At first, they probably thought it was temporary. A break. A reaction that would cool down. They were used to me stepping back in once things got uncomfortable. But days passed, then weeks. Bills started stacking the way they used to before I quietly handled them. The fridge wasn't as full. Notices showed up in the mail, heavier envelopes this time. The house felt different without my routines filling the gaps no one liked to acknowledge. My mom's voice changed when she talked. The calm certainty she'd used with me turned sharp around the edges. She called more often, sometimes twice in one day. At first, she left messages asking where I was, saying we needed to talk. Later, the messages shifted. She sounded worried. Asked if I was okay. Mentioned things were tight, and asked if I could help, just this once. I didn't respond. Calvin took it personally. He didn't leave messages. When he did text, it was short and irritated. He reminded me of responsibility. Of family. Of what I owed. There was no concern in his words, only resentment that the structure he'd counted on was gone. Corey felt it differently. At first, he enjoyed his freedom. The car meant space, independence, attention. But freedom comes with costs no one had prepared him for. Gas wasn't cheap. Insurance wasn't optional. Small expenses added up faster than he expected. Without me covering groceries or picking up slack, he started noticing what things actually cost. The house felt tense. Conversations ended quickly. My mom snapped more. Calvin criticized louder. Corey tried calling me one evening. Then again the next day. His texts were awkward, unsure. He asked how I was doing. He didn't mention the bills at first. When he finally did, it was wrapped in confusion, like he was surprised things weren't just working out. I didn't answer him either. Not because I hated him. Not because I wanted him to struggle. But because stepping back in, even to explain, would pull me into a role I'd already walked away from. The silence forced them to face what had always been invisible. What it took to keep that house running. Who had been quietly holding things together. I imagined my mom sitting at the table late at night, calculator out, trying to stretch numbers that wouldn't bend. I imagined Calvin frustrated, blaming my absence instead of the imbalance that existed long before I left. I imagined Corey realizing, slowly, that the support he'd never questioned wasn't automatic. Consequences didn't arrive with drama. They arrived with overdue notices, uncomfortable conversations, and quiet tension. No one apologized. No one admitted fault. But the truth settled into the house the way dust does when something stops moving. I stayed gone. I didn't block anyone. I didn't explain myself again. I let the silence do what words never could. And for the first time, the weight I'd carried wasn't mine anymore. It was early afternoon when I heard the knock. Soft but steady, the kind that said the person on the other side wasn't leaving until I opened the door. I already knew who it was before I checked the peephole. There was a part of me that had been expecting it. Marissa stood there, hair done, makeup trying to hide exhaustion. For a second, she looked smaller than I remembered. She smiled like we were just picking up from a normal day, but her eyes darted around, taking in the hallway, the unfamiliar space that wasn't hers. I was in the area, she said softly. Thought I'd stop by. I stepped aside, letting her in. She walked slowly, pretending to admire the simplicity of the apartment, the quiet walls, the folded blanket on the couch. It wasn't much, but it was mine. We sat across from each other at the small table. She clasped her hands, took a deep breath, and began. She talked about family, about sticking together, about how things had been misunderstood. She said the word unity more than once, like saying it enough times would make it true. I listened. I didn't interrupt. She said Calvin hadn't meant to sound harsh, that Corey was struggling too, that things had been harder than she expected without me around. Her voice cracked when she said it. But even through the tears, I could hear the same rhythm, the same expectation beneath her words. What she really wanted was restoration, not change. She wanted me back where I used to stand, dependable, quiet, responsible. When she finished, she looked at me the way she used to when I was a child, waiting for me to comfort her, to fix what she couldn't face. I took a slow breath. I hear you, I said, but I'm not coming back. Her face tightened. Niall, we're family. We don't give up on each other. I didn't give up, I said evenly. I stopped being used. The silence that followed was sharp. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just told her what I'd learned, that family isn't an excuse for imbalance, and love doesn't mean endless sacrifice. She started to speak again, but I shook my head. If I come back, nothing changes. You get help, I lose myself again. That's not family. That's survival. Marissa's eyes filled, but I didn't move to comfort her. She looked around the apartment one last time, like she was seeing a version of me she didn't recognize. When she finally stood to leave, she said quietly, "You've changed." I had to, I replied. The door closed behind her, gentle but final. For the first time, she had knocked, and I had chosen whether to let her in. The power had shifted completely, and this time it stayed with me. I didn't walk away thinking I had won something. There was no victory speech, no moment where everything suddenly felt easy. What I felt instead was quiet, the kind that comes after you stop holding your breath. I lost things when I left. I lost the comfort of familiarity. I lost the idea of family I had carried for years, the hope that if I gave enough, stayed patient enough, things would eventually balance out. I lost daily contact with people who had shaped my life, even if they never protected it. But I gained something steadier. Each day on my own, I noticed small changes. I slept better. I made decisions without checking how they would affect everyone else first. My money stayed where I put it. My time belonged to me. The constant weight I'd learned to live under slowly lifted, and I realized how heavy it had been all along. Sometimes I thought about Corey's car. How shiny it looked that day in the driveway. How everyone clapped as if it meant security, success, a future guaranteed. But cars age. Paint fades. Payments pile up. What looked like freedom was just another expense, another responsibility no one had prepared him to carry. The car was never really the gift. The gift was attention, approval, protection. I had never been offered those things. I was given expectations instead. Independence didn't arrive all at once. It grew quietly, in paying my own bills and knowing exactly where every dollar went, in choosing who had access to my life, in learning that peace doesn't need witnesses to be real. There were moments I felt lonely. I won't pretend there weren't. But loneliness passed. What didn't return was the exhaustion of trying to earn my place. I stopped wondering if they understood me. Understanding had never been the issue. Respect was. I didn't cut them off in anger. I didn't make dramatic demands. I simply stepped away and stayed away. Absence did what arguments never could. It made my boundary clear. Loyalty, I learned, means nothing when it only flows one way. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love. It's control dressed up as care. I no longer measured my worth by how useful I was to other people. I measured it by how honestly I lived. Somewhere along the way, approval stopped matching. I wasn't chasing it anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to finally say I'd done enough. I had. Walking away didn't make me bitter. It made me calm. It didn't make me hard. It made me whole. I chose peace over being liked. Silence over explaining myself again. And self-worth over loyalty that was never returned. And for the first time in my life, that choice felt like home. What do you think about Nielle's choice to leave and protect her peace? Was walking away the right decision, or should she have stayed and kept trying for her family? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear your perspective. And if stories like this resonate with you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.